A dog that can talk said something shocking about humans. You won't believe this. On a freezing night, a man stumbles across a wounded German Shepherd. But when the collar sparks to life, the words that come out aren't tricks, they're a warning. The dog isn't just speaking, it's exposing something far darker, something people were never meant to hear. Suddenly, the man who saved it is being hunted too. What secret is so terrifying that someone would silence a dog? And anyone who listens. And when the truth finally comes out, will it save lives? Or destroy them? I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Type it down below. And while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The bitter Wyoming wind howled across the empty highway like a wounded animal, pelting Reed Halpern's old pickup truck with stinging pellets of snow. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he squinted through the windshield, the wipers barely keeping up with the relentless storm. The dashboard clock glowed 9:47 p.m., but the winter darkness made it feel like midnight. Come on, Reed muttered, scanning desperately for any sign of shelter. His truck was running on fumes, and the temperature gauge was dropping faster than his fuel gauge. The storm had caught him off guard on his way back from a routine animal control call, transforming the familiar road into an alien landscape of swirling white. Through the curtain of snow, a shape emerged, the skeletal remains of an old gas station, its weathered sign creaking in the wind. Reed let out a relieved breath and carefully guided his truck into the abandoned lot. The building's windows were boarded up, but the overhang above the ancient pumps would at least provide some protection from the storm. As he killed the engine, the wind's moan became deafening. Reed pulled his worn work jacket tighter around his lean frame, grateful for the heavy-duty flashlight he always kept in his truck. County kennel techs learned to be prepared for anything, though tonight was testing those limits. He was about to settle in for an uncomfortable wait when movement caught his eye. Something large was huddled against the building's wall, partially hidden behind a rusted oil drum. Reed's heart quickened. In his line of work, approaching unknown animals in the dark was never wise. But as he watched, the shape shuddered in a very distinct way. "Hey there," he called softly, directing his flashlight beam toward the creature. A pair of amber eyes reflected back, and Reed's breath caught. It was a German Shepherd, and a big one at that. The dog's coat was matted and unkempt, but Reed could see the powerful build beneath. What struck him most was the dog's stance, not aggressive or fearful, but alert and assessing, like it was sizing him up. Reed had worked with hundreds of dogs over the years, from abused strays to highly trained service animals. This one was different. There was an intelligence in those eyes that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "It's okay," he said, using the soothing tone that had calmed countless frightened animals. "I'm not going to hurt you." He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a few beef jerky strips, another lesson learned from years on the job. The shepherd's nose twitched, but it didn't move. That's when Reed noticed the collar. Not a regular pet collar, but a sophisticated training model. However, this one was cracked, with exposed wiring visible through the damage. Reed took a cautious step forward, holding out the jerky. The dog watched him for a long moment, then slowly approached. Its movement was steady but favoring one side slightly, injured, but not severely. As it accepted the offering from Reed's hand, he got a closer look at its condition. The dog's coat showed signs of recent neglect, but its muscular frame and clear eyes spoke of previous good care. "Where did you come from?" "Big guy," Reed murmured, carefully extending his hand to check the collar. The dog allowed the touch, another sign that made Reed's instincts tingle. This was no ordinary stray. The collar was definitely high-end tech, the kind used in professional training. As Reed's fingers found the control panel, something unexpected happened. A crackle of static erupted from the damaged device, making both man and dog jump. Then, through the static, came words that turned Reed's blood to ice. "Humans hunt humans." Reed stumbled backward, his flashlight beam dancing wildly. "What the hell?" The voice had been mechanical but clear, despite the collar's damaged state. The German Shepherd watched him steadily, those intelligent eyes seeming to hold secrets Reed wasn't sure he wanted to know. With trembling fingers, Reed pulled out his phone. The signal was weak, but he managed to open his camera app. Okay, boy, let's try that again. He reached for the caller's panel, his phone recording. The static crackled once more, and the same chilling phrase emerged. Humans hunt humans. Reed played back the video, his mind racing. The caller was some kind of recording device, but why? And what kind of horror had this dog witnessed? The shepherd pressed against Reed's leg, a warm, solid presence in the howling storm. Looking down at those knowing eyes, Reed made a decision. You're coming with me, buddy. We'll call you. He thought of the old movies his grandfather loved. Bruno, that work for you? The dog's tail gave a single wag, and Reed felt a smile tugging at his lips despite the unease churning in his gut. He guided Bruno to his truck, helping the large dog into the passenger seat. The storm was beginning to ease, and first light couldn't be far off. As Reed waited for conditions to improve enough for safe driving, he uploaded the video to his social media accounts. His hands were still shaking as he typed out a brief description of finding the dog and the caller's disturbing message. By the time the sky began to lighten, his phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. The video was spreading like wildfire, but mixed with the shocked responses were accusations of hoaxing. Reed understood the skepticism. He could hardly believe it himself, but one look at Bruno's scarred body and watchful eyes told him this was very, very real. When Reed finally pulled into the county animal shelter where he worked, his supervisor was waiting, arms crossed and face stern. Halpern, what kind of stunt are you trying to pull? It's not a stunt, Reed said firmly, as Bruno stepped down from the truck with military precision. This dog found me last night, and that caller said what it said. Something's wrong here, really wrong. His supervisor's expression hardened. The county's already getting calls about your little viral video. We don't need this kind of attention. Either admit it's a hoax now or... Oh, what? Reed's voice was quiet, but steady. Years of being the unassuming kennel tech, the guy nobody noticed, had left him with a deep well of stubborn determination. I know what I heard. This dog needs help, and whatever he's been through, whatever that message means, someone needs to investigate it. Bruno pressed against Reed's leg again, and Reed felt a surge of protective instinct. The dog had chosen to trust him, and Reed wasn't about to let him down. Whatever truth lay behind that damaged collar and its haunting message, Reed knew his life had just changed irrevocably. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the shelter's parking lot. Reed looked down at Bruno, whose amber eyes met his with unwavering trust. Come on, boy, he said softly. Let's get you checked out and cleaned up. Then we'll figure out what's really going on here. As they walked into the shelter, Reed's phone continued to buzz with reactions to the video, but his focus was on the dog at his side and the mystery they'd stumbled into on that stormy night. Something told him this was just the beginning of a much darker story, one that would require all of his courage and Bruno's apparent wisdom to uncover. The fluorescent lights of the veterinary clinic hummed overhead as Reed guided Bruno through the familiar back entrance. His heart lifted when he saw Tamsin Lee organizing supplies at the metal examination table. If anyone would listen without immediately dismissing him as crazy, it would be her. Tamsin looked up, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes widened at the sight of the German Shepherd. Reed, what's going on? I need your help, Tamsin, and I need you to keep an open mind. Reed's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his phone to show her the video. Tamsin watched in silence, her expression shifting from skepticism to concern. When the mechanical voice spoke those three chilling words, she inhaled sharply. This isn't some kind of joke, is it? You know me better than that, Reed said quietly. Found him last night during the storm. The collar's damaged, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. Tamsin knelt beside Bruno, who sat perfectly still as she examined him. Her gentle hands moved carefully over his scarred body, checking for injuries. He's clearly been through something traumatic. Military-grade training, I'd guess based on his behavior. But this collar. She traced her fingers along the cracked casing. I've never seen technology like this in any service animal equipment. The examination room door burst open, making them all jump. Animal Control Officer Marcus Burke strode in, his face red with anger. Halpern, that video of yours has caused chaos. The mayor's office is getting hammered with calls. Officer Burke, Reed started, but Burke cut him off. The dog's being classified as dangerous. County policy is clear. It needs to be put down immediately. Tamsin stepped between Burke and Bruno. On what grounds? He's shown no aggressive behavior. Unknown origin? Possible military connection? That weird recording device? He's a liability waiting to happen. I've already filed the paperwork. Reed felt his chest tighten. You can't do that. He's evidence of something. We don't even know what yet. Watch me, Burke sneered. Unless you want to file an official appeal, that'll buy you 48 hours, but it won't change the outcome. Reed straightened his shoulders. Then, I'm filing an appeal. Right now. Burke's smile was cold. Your funeral, Halpern. But in 48 hours, that dog is done. He slapped a form onto the examination table and stalked out. Tamsin immediately began examining the collar more closely. We need to figure out what this thing really is. Help me get it off him. Bruno stood perfectly still as they carefully removed the collar. Up close, the technology was even more sophisticated than it had appeared in the dark gas station. Beneath the damaged outer casing, they could see complex circuitry. Look at this, Tamsin murmured, using a magnifying glass to study the components. These aren't just recording components. There's a whole programming interface here. Reed leaned in closer. What does that mean? It means that phrase wasn't random. Someone deliberately programmed it into the collar. Tamsin's fingers moved deftly as she cleaned away dirt and grime. There's more here, but we need to be careful not to damage anything further. For the next hour, they worked methodically, documenting everything they found. Bruno watched them with those intelligent eyes, occasionally pressing his nose against Reed's hand as if offering encouragement. Reed, Tamsin said suddenly, her voice tense. Look at this serial number sequence. It's military, but it's not like any service dog identification I've ever seen. This is something else entirely. Reed felt a chill run down his spine. Someone wanted him to be more than just a guard dog. They wanted him to be a witness. But a witness to what? Tamsin asked softly, scratching behind Bruno's ears. The dog leaned into her touch, and Reed couldn't help but notice how natural they looked together. Whatever it was, someone went to a lot of trouble to make sure he could tell us about it. Reed checked his watch. We've got 47 hours left to figure it out. Tamsin's determination showed in the set of her jaw. Then we better get to work. I've got some contacts in veterinary forensics. Let me make some calls. As Tamsin pulled out her phone, Reed knelt beside Bruno. The shepherd's amber eyes met his, and Reed could swear he saw understanding there. We're not giving up on you, boy. Whatever you know, whoever did this to you, we're going to find out the truth. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Tamsin's contacts provided crucial information about the collar's components, while Reed documented everything meticulously. They discovered additional circuitry that suggested the collar could be activated by specific triggers, though many of its functions were still unclear. This isn't just advanced technology, Tamsin said, pushing back from the examination table where they'd spread out their findings. This is cutting-edge stuff, the kind of tech that doesn't officially exist yet. Reed rubbed his tired eyes. So whoever programmed this collar had access to classified technology, Tamsin finished, and used it to turn a German shepherd into some kind of four-legged recording device. Bruno had remained close to them throughout their investigation, alternating between watching the door and observing their work. His military training was evident in every controlled movement, every alert response to unexpected sounds. You know what's weird? Reed said, watching the dog. He found me. In that storm, he could have gone anywhere, but he came to me, like he was looking for help specifically. Tamsin's eyes widened. What if he was? You said it yourself. He's more than just a guard dog. What if he was trained to seek out someone who could help expose whatever he witnessed? The implications of that possibility settled over them like a heavy blanket. Reed looked at Bruno with new understanding. The dog met his gaze steadily, and Reed could almost imagine the weight of secrets behind those intelligent eyes. "We need to protect him," Reed said firmly. "Not just from Burke and the county, but from whoever did this to him in the first place. If they find out he survived, they'll want him silenced," Tamsin finished grimly. She reached for her phone again. "I know some people who might be able to help. Independent investigators who won't dismiss this as a hoax." Reed nodded, feeling a mix of determination and fear. In just 24 hours, his life had transformed from the quiet routine of a kennel tech to something far more dangerous. But looking at Bruno, seeing the trust in those amber eyes, he knew he couldn't walk away. "Whatever happens," he told the shepherd, "we're in this together now." The rest of the afternoon was spent documenting everything they could about the collar and Bruno's condition. Tamsin's expertise proved invaluable as she noted details that might have escaped Reed's notice, subtle signs of advanced training, old injuries that told a story of their own. "Look at these scars," she said, gently parting Bruno's fur. "Some are from combat or training, but others, it's like he was in a fighting ring, but more organized, more controlled." Reed felt sick at the implications. Like some kind of test subject? Maybe. Tamsin's hands were gentle as she examined each mark. Whatever they were doing, they pushed him to his limits. But they also invested a fortune in his training in that collar. He wasn't just an experiment, he was an asset. As evening approached, they had filled several notebooks with observations and theories. The collar's technology was far-hand, beyond anything they'd seen before, but its purpose was becoming clearer. Someone had wanted a witness they could control, one that couldn't be easily discredited or silenced. But they had failed to account for one thing: Bruno's own intelligence and determination. Somehow, the shepherd had escaped, found Reed, and ensured his message would be heard. Now, with less than 40 hours left before Animal Control's deadline, Reed and Tamsin faced a race against time to uncover enough evidence to save Bruno's life, and possibly expose whatever dark truth the dog had been programmed to reveal. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the elk range as Reed's truck bounced along the rutted service road. Beside him, Tamsin studied her tablet, where a blinking dot marked their destination. In the back seat, Bruno sat alert, his ears pricking at every bump and turn. "The signal's getting stronger," Tamsin said, adjusting the display. "Whatever this GPS tracker is leading us to, it's somewhere in the next quarter mile." Reed gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. Vale's Ranch, of all the places that collar could lead us. He glanced in his rearview mirror, checking again for any signs of pursuit. The elk range stretched for thousands of acres, most of it owned by Eldon Vale, a man whose wealth was matched only by his influence in the county. Even being here felt dangerous, like stepping into a predator's territory. "There," Tamsin pointed to a clearing ahead. "The signal's strongest just beyond those trees." Reed parked the truck behind a stand of thick pines, hoping to keep it hidden from any passing vehicles. As they stepped out, Bruno jumped down eagerly, his nose already working the ground. "Easy, boy," Reed murmured, checking the shepherd's leash was secure. The last thing they needed was to lose him on Vale's property. They moved carefully through the underbrush, following Tamsin's directions. Bruno walked ahead of them, straining at his leash with purpose. The dog's behavior changed suddenly. His ears flattened, and his steps became more deliberate. "He remembers this place," Tamsin whispered, watching the shepherd's body language. "Look how he's moving." Reed nodded, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Whatever Bruno had witnessed here, it had left a mark on him. The shepherd pulled them off the worn path, leading them through a dense thicket. After about 50 yards, he stopped abruptly, nose pointing toward a pile of fallen logs. "This is it," Tamsin said, checking her tablet. "The signal's coming from right here." Reed approached the logs cautiously. At first glance, they appeared naturally fallen, but as he looked closer, he noticed how deliberately they were arranged. Bruno pawed at the ground near the largest log, whining softly. "Help me with this," Reed said, getting a grip on the heavy wood. Together, they rolled the log aside, revealing a metal box partially buried in the earth. The cache was military grade, sealed against the elements. Reed's hands shook as he worked the latches. Inside, wrapped in waterproof material, they found a smartphone and several memory cards. "It's still charged," Tamsin said in surprise, powering on the phone. "Someone's been maintaining this cache." The phone's screen lit up, revealing dozens of video files. Reed selected one at random and immediately wished he hadn't. The footage showed a nighttime scene, filmed from what appeared to be a helmet camera. Masked figures on all-terrain vehicles pursued dark shapes through the woods. The shadows resolved into human forms, people running, desperate, terrified. "Oh God," Tamsin breathed, her face pale in the phone's glow. "They're hunting them, actually hunting them." Reed couldn't look away from the horrifying images. The hunters moved with practiced efficiency, herding their prey like animals. Bruno pressed against his leg, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "This is what you saw, isn't it, boy?" Reed asked softly, running a hand over the shepherd's head. "This is what they made you witness." A distant engine sound snapped them back to reality. Reed quickly repacked the cache, making sure to grab the phone and memory cards. They needed to get out of there, fast. They retraced their steps hurriedly, Bruno leading the way. The shepherd seemed to understand the urgency, moving swiftly but quietly through the undergrowth. The engine sounds grew fainter, probably just a ranch vehicle on a distant road, but they couldn't take any chances. In their haste to return to the truck, Reed didn't notice the ground changing beneath his feet. One step landed on empty air as the earth suddenly dropped away. He felt himself falling forward, the edge of a hidden ravine crumbling beneath him. Time seemed to slow. Reed saw the steep drop below him, rocks and broken trees waiting 30 feet down. His heart stopped, and then jerked as something pulled him backward hard. Bruno had braced himself, the leash going taut between them. The shepherd's powerful muscles strained as he pulled Reed back from the edge, giving him the crucial seconds needed to scramble to safety. Reed lay on solid ground, heart pounding, as Tamsin rushed to help him up. Bruno stood over them both, scanning the surroundings with alert intensity. "You okay?" Tamsin asked, her voice shaking. Reed nodded, unable to speak just yet. He reached out to Bruno, burying his fingers in the shepherd's fur. "Good boy," he whispered. "Thank you." They made it back to the truck without further incident, but the terror of what they'd discovered, both in the cache and at the ravine, stayed with them. Reed's hands trembled as he started the engine. "We need to get this evidence somewhere safe," Tamsin said, clutching her bag containing the phone and memory cards. "And then we need to figure out who to trust with it." Reed guided the truck carefully back down the service road, checking his mirrors constantly. Bruno remained vigilant in the back seat, his attention divided between watching their rear and keeping an eye on his human companions. The magnitude of what they'd stumbled into was overwhelming. This wasn't just about a mysterious talking caller anymore. They'd uncovered something monstrous: organized hunts on private land, wealthy predators pursuing human prey. And somewhere in all of it, Bruno had been forced to watch, his caller recording evidence that was never meant to see the light of day. As they left the elk range behind, Reed glanced at Tamsin, seeing his own mix of determination and fear reflected in her eyes. They had the evidence now, but that made them targets. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. In the back seat, Bruno settled slightly, though his ears remained alert. He'd already saved Reed's life once today. Something told Reed it wouldn't be the last time they'd need the shepherd's protection. Reed's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as they drove back into town, the evidence of the horrific hunts safely tucked away in Tamsin's bag. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road, and Bruno remained alert in the back seat, his amber eyes scanning their surroundings constantly. "We should go straight to the state police," Tamsin suggested, clutching her bag closer. "This is way bigger than local law enforcement." Reed nodded, But before he could respond, flashing lights appeared in his rearview mirror. 2 county patrol cars were closing in fast behind them. "What now?" Tamsin whispered, her face going pale. Reed pulled over, his stomach churning. Bruno let out a low growl as deputies approached from both sides of the truck. Reed recognized Deputy Morris on his side, a man he'd known for years through his work at the county kennel. "Step out of the vehicle, both of you," Morris ordered, his hand resting on his holster. The friendly demeanor Reed was used to had vanished, replaced by cold professionalism. "What's this about?" Reed asked, keeping his voice steady as he complied. "Sheriff's orders. We need to confiscate any electronic devices in your possession." Morris's eyes flicked to Tamsin's bag. "That includes phones, cameras, and any memory cards." Tamsin clutched her bag tighter. "You can't just take our personal property without—" "We have probable cause," the other deputy cut in. "There's been a report of trespassing and theft on private property. Hand over the bag, ma'am." Reed felt helpless as they watched the deputies search the truck and seize their phones, including the crucial evidence from the cache. Bruno remained in the back seat, barely containing his agitation, but Reed had trained him well enough to stay put. "Follow us to the station," Morris instructed. "Sheriff Keats wants to talk to you both." The county sheriff's office was a squat brick building that had seen better days. Inside, they found Sheriff Ronan Keats waiting for them, his bulk filling the doorway of his office. His face was set in hard lines of disapproval. "Mr. Halpern," Keats drawled, "seems like you've been causing quite a stir in my county." Reed met his gaze steadily. "We found evidence of serious crimes, Sheriff. People being hunted for sport on Vale's property." Keats's laugh was cold. "Evidence? You mean this?" He held up the phone from the cache. "Our tech team's already been through it. Nothing but damaged files and corrupted data. Convenient, isn't it?" Reed's heart sank. "That's impossible. We saw the videos ourselves. Just like you saw that dog's collar talk." Keats's voice dripped with sarcasm. "First a viral video hoax, now trespassing and making false accusations against a respected member of this community. You're really working hard to destroy what little credibility you had left." "It's not a hoax," Tamsin interjected. "We both saw—" "Miss Lee." Keats cut her off. "I'd advise you to distance yourself from this situation. Mr. Halpern here seems determined to chase conspiracy theories, but you don't have to go down with him." Reed watched helplessly as Keats pulled out a stack of papers from his desk. "Let's review your history, shall we? Failed search and rescue career, living paycheck to paycheck at the county kennel, and now this desperate grab for attention? People are already calling you the talking dog hoaxer on social media." The sheriff's words hit home. Reed had seen the online comments dismissing his original video, but hearing it from a position of authority made it worse. His reputation, built over years of quiet, honest work, was crumbling before his eyes. "What about Bruno?" Reed asked, dreading the answer. "The dangerous dog you removed from impound under false pretenses?" Keats smiled grimly. "Animal control has already picked him up from your truck. Given the circumstances, I've authorized an expedited euthanasia order. Can't have dangerous animals running around, especially ones involved in publicity stunts." Reed felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "You can't do that. He's not dangerous. He saved my life today." "More tall tales?" Keats shook his head. "Son, I'm trying to do you a favor here. Drop this nonsense about hunting humans and talking dogs. Go home, lay low, and maybe people will eventually forget about your little hoax." "It's the truth," Reed insisted, but his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. The system he'd trusted, the law he'd always respected, had turned against him completely. Keats stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "Deputies will escort you both out. Miss Lee, you're free to go. Mr. Halpern, consider this a warning. Any more stunts, any more trespassing, and you'll be facing serious charges." Outside the station, Reed stood in the gathering dusk, feeling more alone than he ever had. Tamsin touched his arm gently. "I believe you," she said quietly. "We both know what we saw." But Reed barely heard her. All he could think about was Bruno, alone in the county kennel, facing a death sentence for the crime of being a witness. The shepherd had saved his life, had trusted him, and now Reed had failed to protect him. "They're going to kill him," Reed said, his voice breaking. "They're going to kill him to cover this up, and there's nothing I can do about it." The weight of powerlessness pressed down on him. Every avenue of official help had been closed off. His reputation was in tatters, his evidence seized, and his credibility destroyed. The machine of local authority had aligned against him, turning him into a laughingstock while the real criminals went free. Tamsin squeezed his arm. "There's always something we can do. We just have to figure out what it is." But Reed had never felt more lost. The simple, quiet life he'd built had shattered in less than 48 hours. Now he was branded a liar and a hoaxer, while somewhere in the county kennel, a brave dog who knew too much awaited execution. The sun had set completely now, leaving them in the growing darkness of a small town that suddenly felt very dangerous indeed. Every passing car, every shadow, seemed to hold potential threats. They'd uncovered something terrible, and the powers that be had made it clear the truth would not be allowed to surface. Reed sat slumped on a bench outside the sheriff's office, his world collapsing around him. The streetlights buzzed overhead in the growing darkness, casting harsh shadows across the empty sidewalk. Tamsin had gone to get them coffee. They both knew sleep wasn't coming tonight. A man in a rumpled suit approached, his tie loose around his neck. He glanced around furtively before sitting down beside Reed. "Mr. Halpern," he said quietly. "I'm Porter Ames, former assistant district attorney. We need to talk." Reed turned, suspicious. "Former?" "Suspended," Porter corrected, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "After I started asking questions about certain connections between the DA's office and Eldon Vale's enterprises." "Why are you talking to me?" "Because I saw your video." The dog with the collar. Porter leaned closer, lowering his voice. "And I know what's really happening up in the Elk Range." Reed felt his pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" "Those security exercises Vale claims to run on his property? They're not exercises. They're games. Hunts." Porter's eyes darted around the empty street. "Rich clients pay enormous sums to hunt human targets." "That's insane," Reed whispered, but he remembered the footage they'd found. Masked figures on ATVs pursuing human-shaped targets. "Is it? Think about it. Remote location. Private land. A powerful family with law enforcement in their pocket." Porter pulled out a small notebook. "I've been gathering evidence for months, but I couldn't get close enough. Then you found that dog." Tamsin returned with 2 paper cups of coffee, hesitating when she saw Porter. Reed nodded that it was okay. "The collar," Porter continued. "It's not just a recording device. It's a witness. Someone on the inside programmed it to document what was happening. They knew a dog would be overlooked, could go places humans couldn't." Reed remembered how Bruno had led them straight to the hidden cache. But why? Because someone wanted proof. And now that dog is scheduled to be put down, and your evidence has mysteriously vanished. Porter's tired eyes met Reed's. "They're closing ranks, Mr. Halpern. The sheriff, the DA, half the county officials. They're all tied to Vale money." Tamsin sat down, her face pale. "So what can we do?" "We need more evidence. Concrete proof that can't be buried." Porter handed Reed a business card. "My number's on the back. I still have contacts in the state attorney's office, people who aren't bought. But we need something solid." After Porter left, Reed and Tamsin drove to her small veterinary clinic. The place was quiet after hours, lit only by desk lamps as they spread out maps of the Elk Range across an exam table. "Look here," Tamsin pointed. "These old mining roads, they're not on the official maps anymore, but they still exist. That's how we got in earlier." Reed traced the paths with his finger, old instincts from his search and rescue days kicking in. Multiple access points, hidden valleys, places to conceal vehicles. It's perfect for their sick game. "You're thinking like a handler again," Tamsin observed. Reed nodded slowly. "Bruno, he's not just any guard dog. The way he responds to commands, how he led us to that cache. He's had serious training. Like a search and rescue dog? Exactly. Reed straightened up, energy returning to his voice. Remember how he saved me from that ravine? That wasn't just luck. He's been trained to protect, to track, to find things, and someone turned those skills into a way to document these hunts. Tamsin pulled up the original video of Bruno's collar on her phone. Look at his response when you first adjusted the collar. The way he held still, like he was waiting. Reed's eyes widened. Standard position for equipment checks. We use those commands in search and rescue all the time. He grabbed a notepad, starting to write. If we can figure out his training background, decode his command set, we might be able to find more evidence. Tamsin finished. But Reed, they're going to put him down tomorrow. Not if we can prove he's not dangerous. Reed's voice had a new strength to it. These aren't the actions of an aggressive dog. They're the responses of a highly trained working animal, one that someone trusted enough to make him their witness. They worked late into the night, mapping possible locations, listing equipment they'd need, writing down every command phrase they could remember Bruno responding to. Reed felt his old skills coming back, the careful planning and attention to detail that had once made him a respected handler. You know what this means, Tamsin said softly. If we're right about all this, these people won't just try to discredit you anymore. They'll do whatever it takes to keep this quiet. Reed looked at the maps, the notes, the evidence they were piecing together. He thought of Bruno, alone in his kennel, counting down the hours. The shepherd had saved his life, had trusted him when everyone else had turned away. Now it was time to return that trust. I know, he said, but I can't walk away, not from this, not from him. Tamsin squeezed his hand. Then we better make sure we get it right. They kept working as the night deepened, their coffee growing cold, plotting out a plan that would either expose a terrible truth or destroy them in the attempt. But for the first time since this began, Reed felt his confidence returning. He wasn't just a discredited kennel worker anymore. He was a handler again, with skills and experience that could make a difference. And somewhere in the county kennel, a brave dog waited, carrying secrets that could bring down an empire of corruption, if only they could find a way to reveal them in time. The moon cast long shadows across Vale's property as Reed and Tamsin crouched behind a fallen log. Bruno sat alert between them, his ears pricked forward. It was just past midnight, and the spring air held a bitter chill. "You're sure about this?" Tamsin whispered, adjusting her dark jacket. Reed checked Bruno's harness one more time. Porter was right. We need real evidence. And Bruno's our best chance at finding it. He pulled out a small flashlight, keeping it pointed at the ground. Remember, if anything goes wrong, head straight back to the truck. The shepherd's training had come rushing back to Reed over the past few hours. Each command, each subtle signal that showed Bruno wasn't just any guard dog, but a highly trained professional. Now, watching the dog's focused attention, Reed felt his old confidence returning. "Track," he whispered, using the hand. Signal he'd discovered worked with Bruno. The shepherd's nose immediately dropped to the ground, and he began moving forward with purpose. They followed, staying low and quiet. The terrain was rough, scattered pine stands and rocky outcrops that made perfect hiding spots. Reed noticed signs they weren't the first to pass this way. Broken twigs, scuffed earth, the occasional glint of metal from discarded shell casings. Bruno led them to a small valley, sheltered by high rock walls. Reed's flashlight beam caught something pale against the dark earth. He knelt down, heart pounding. "What is it?" Tamsin asked. Reed picked up a worn backpack, partially buried under leaves. Inside, he found a wrinkled bus ticket, a few cheap toiletries, and a dog-eared notebook. The first page held a handwritten note. "Joe Boffer sounds too good to be true, but what choice do I have? Heading to Wyoming. Will write when I get settled. Love, Danny." "Look at the date," Tamsin said softly. 3 months ago." Bruno whined, pawing at the ground nearby. Reed swept his light around, revealing more scattered belongings. A torn jacket, an old phone with a cracked screen, a wallet with an Idaho ID inside. They're recruiting them, Reed said, his voice tight. Desperate people, probably promised work on the ranch, then they just disappear. Tamsin's hand found his in the darkness. We need to document everything. Get pictures, GPS coordinates. A sharp crack echoed through the valley. Bruno's head snapped up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Down, Reed hissed, pulling Tamsin behind a boulder as engines roared to life in the distance. The sweep of headlights cut through the trees above them. ATV patrol, Tamsin whispered. They must have motion sensors or cameras out here. Reed gripped Bruno's harness, mind racing. The shepherd was completely still, tracking the approaching sounds with practiced intensity. This wasn't the first time he'd hidden from these machines. The ATVs were getting closer, their lights probing the shadows. Reed could hear voices now, rough commands being shouted back and forth. They were being surrounded. We have to split up, Reed said. Bruno and I will draw them off. You get back to the truck with the evidence. Reed, no. Trust me. He pressed the backpack and phone into her hands. I've done this before. In search and rescue. Bruno knows what he's doing. We'll meet you at the South Access Road. Before she could argue, Reed gave Bruno the hand signal to move out. The shepherd understood immediately, staying low as they crept away from Tamsin's position. Reed pulled out his own phone, turning on its flashlight and waving it obviously through the trees. The reaction was instant. Engines revved as the ATVs changed direction, heading toward his light. Reed clicked it off and ran, Bruno matching his pace perfectly. They weaved through the trees, using the terrain to their advantage while leading the pursuit away from Tamsin. Shouts echoed behind them. A spotlight swept past, nearly catching them. Reed vaulted over a fallen tree, Bruno clearing it effortlessly beside him. The shepherd suddenly checked, pulling Reed to a stop just before they reached the edge of a steep drop. The ATVs were closing in from three sides now. Reed could see the armed figures on them, their faces hidden behind tactical gear. These weren't regular security guards. They moved with military precision. Bruno's ears flattened, and he tugged Reed toward a narrow gap between two boulders. Reed followed without hesitation, trusting the dog's instincts. The space led to a natural tunnel, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. Behind them, voices cursed as the pursuit realized they couldn't follow. Reed heard orders being shouted to circle around, find the other exit. He and Bruno kept moving, the shepherd's night vision guiding them through the twisting passage. They emerged on a steep slope, loose shale sliding under their feet. Reed could see the lights of the ATVs circling below, searching. Bruno led him along a precarious path, staying just ahead of the beams. A shot cracked out, sparking off the rocks near them. Reed dropped flat, heart hammering. Bruno pressed against him, offering cover and comfort at once. More voices approached from above. They were being boxed in. Reed looked at Bruno, saw the steady confidence in those amber eyes. The shepherd had survived this before, had helped someone else try to expose these monsters. Okay, boy, Reed whispered. Show me how you got away last time. Bruno's ears perked up. He led Reed to what looked like a solid rock face, nosing aside some brush to reveal another hidden crevice. They slipped inside just as light swept over their previous position. The passage descended sharply, forcing them to half-slide through the darkness. Reed could hear water somewhere ahead. The sound grew louder until they emerged beside a fast-moving stream, its banks steep and muddy. Bruno didn't hesitate. He plunged into the water, and Reed followed. The cold shocked his lungs, but he understood the strategy. The water would mask their scent and throw off any tracking. They let the current carry them downstream, staying close to the banks where shadows were deepest. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, then faded entirely. Still, they kept going until Bruno finally led them out onto a small gravel bar. Reed stood shivering in his soaked clothes, listening intently. Nothing but normal night sounds reached them. They'd made it. Good boy, he whispered, hugging the wet shepherd close. You brilliant, brave dog. Bruno licked his face once, then turned to shake himself thoroughly. Reed couldn't help but smile, even as he wiped water from his eyes. The dog's matter-of-fact attitude was somehow reassuring after what they'd just experienced. It took them another hour of careful navigation to reach the meeting point. Tamsin was waiting with the truck, fear evident in every line of her body until she saw them approach. "Thank God," she breathed, hugging them both despite their dampness. "I heard shots." "We're okay," Reed assured her. "Did you get out with everything?" Tamsin nodded, pulling out her phone to show him the photos she'd taken of their discoveries. "It's all here. The backpack, the IDs, everything." "Reed, there were more sites like that. I found 3 more stashes of personal belongings on my way out. These people, they're not just disappearing. They're being hunted for sport." Reed looked at Bruno, remembering how naturally the shepherd had navigated their escape. And he was supposed to be their witness. Someone trained him to document it all, then sent him out with that collar as evidence. "Which means they'll try even harder to silence him now," Tamsin said. "And us." Reed scratched Bruno's ears, feeling the dog lean trustingly against his leg. "Let them try. We know the truth now, and we're not going to let them bury it." They climbed into the truck, Bruno settling protectively between them as Tamsin drove them away from Vale's land. Behind them, ATV lights still swept the hills, searching for prey that had slipped through their grasp. Reed stared at the morning newspaper, his hands shaking. The headline screamed, "Disgraced prosecutor linked to conspiracy theories." Below it, Porter Ames' tired face looked out from an unflattering photo. The article painted him as unstable, citing anonymous sources who claimed he'd been removed from office for erratic behavior, not the corruption investigation he'd mentioned. His phone buzzed. Another text from Tamsin remained unanswered. She'd been due to finish her evening shift at the vet clinic 3 hours ago. The knot in Reed's stomach tightened. He dialed her number again. Straight to voicemail. "Something's wrong," he told Bruno, who sat alert beside him. The shepherd's ears twitched, picking up the worry in Reed's voice. Reed's laptop pinged with an email. Notification. Someone had sent him Tamsin's phone's location data. It last pinged near the eastern edge of Vale's property, the same area where they'd found evidence of the hunts. "No," Reed whispered. "No, no, no." He grabbed his keys, but before he could reach the door, it burst open. Sheriff Keats stepped in, flanked by 2 deputies. "Reed Halpern," Keats announced. "You're under arrest for criminal trespass and interference with private property." "What?" "You can't. I need to find Tamsin. She's missing." "Hands where we can see them," one deputy ordered, reaching for his cuffs. Bruno growled low in his throat. Reed quickly commanded him to stay, knowing any aggressive move would only make things worse. "The dog goes to the pound," Keats said as they cuffed Reed. "Courts denied your appeal. Euthanasia order stands for tomorrow at dawn." The words hit Reed like physical blows. He struggled to breathe as they separated him from Bruno, the shepherd fighting against the catchpole one deputy wielded. "Please," Reed begged. "You don't understand. Tamsin's in danger. Check her phone location. Miss Lee filed a restraining order against you this morning." Keats cut in. "Claims you've been harassing her with conspiracy theories." "That's impossible. She was with me last night, we found." "Save it for your lawyer," Keats said, "if you can find one willing to take your case." They dragged Reed out to the patrol car. Through the window, he watched another deputy load Bruno into an animal control van. The shepherd's eyes locked with his, filled with an intelligence that made the separation even more painful. At the station, Reed's requests to call Porter were denied. "Mr. Ames is no longer permitted to practice law in this county," the booking officer informed him with a smirk. They threw him in a holding cell. Hours crawled by. Every attempt to explain about Tamsin was met with derision or ignored entirely. His thoughts raced in circles. Tamsin missing, Bruno facing death, Porter discredited, and him locked away where he couldn't help either of them. Night fell. Reed paced his cell, 8 steps each way. The same distance as the kennel runs where he'd first met Bruno. Where, tomorrow morning, they would end the shepherd's life. A deputy passed by, rattling his baton along the bars. "Got a message from Animal Control," he said. "That vicious dog of yours? Scheduled for 7 a.m. sharp. Guess you won't be filing any more appeals." Reed pressed his forehead against the cold metal bars. Somewhere out there, Tamsin was in danger. He knew it in his bones. The woman who'd stood by him, who'd believed in him when no one else did, who'd shown such gentle strength with every injured animal she treated. She would never have filed a restraining order, which meant someone had forced her to, or worse. And Bruno, brave, loyal Bruno, who'd saved Reed's life, who carried evidence that could expose everything. They would kill him simply because he knew too much, because he was the last living witness to their crimes. Reed slid down to sit on the concrete floor, his back against the bars. He'd failed them both. Failed to protect them. Failed to expose the truth. Failed to be the man they needed him to be. The same way he'd failed that lost hiker years ago, when his search and rescue skills hadn't been enough to save a life. The cell felt like it was closing in. Reed could barely breathe through the weight of his helplessness. Dawn was coming, and with it, he would lose everything that mattered. The dog who'd brought purpose back to his life. The woman who'd awakened his heart. The chance to stop evil men from treating human lives like game animals. Hours passed in a haze of despair. Reed didn't move from his spot on the floor, even as his muscles cramped and protested. He deserved the discomfort. Deserved every second of this punishment for not being strong enough, smart enough, brave enough to protect those who trusted him. The station grew quiet as night shift replaced day shift. Somewhere in the darkness, Tamsin was alone and afraid. Somewhere in a cold kennel, Bruno waited for morning, not understanding why his human had abandoned him. And here sat Reed, powerless to help either of them. He closed his eyes, remembering Tamsin's smile when she'd first examined Bruno, the way she'd instantly understood the dog's importance. Remembered Bruno's unwavering trust. Even after everything humans had put him through, the memory of their faith in him only made his failure hurt more deeply. The night crawled forward, each tick of the clock bringing dawn closer. Reed had never felt so utterly alone, so completely defeated. Everything he'd tried to build, everyone he'd tried to protect, it was all slipping away, and he was trapped here, unable to stop it. A deputy walked past, doing bed check. "Few more hours," he commented. "Then that dangerous dog won't be a problem anymore." Reed didn't respond. He stayed motionless on the floor, crushed under the weight of his failures. Dawn was coming, and with it, the end of everything he'd fought for. He had never felt so powerless, so utterly defeated. The cell's shadows lengthened as night settled in fully. Somewhere out there, evil men went about their brutal games unchecked. And all Reed could do was sit in his cell, waiting for morning to take away what little hope remained. The cell door's metallic creak jolted Reed from his miserable thoughts. A deputy he didn't recognize stood there, expression unreadable in the dim light. "You've got a visitor," the deputy said flatly. "Legal consultation." Reed's heart leaped, thinking Porter had somehow found a way to help. But when they led him to the consultation room, a striking woman in her mid-30s sat waiting. Her sharp features and expensive clothes marked her as someone of means, though she carried herself with intention that suggested deep discomfort. "Mr. Halpern," she said, her voice low and controlled. "I'm Lenore Vale." Reed stiffened at the name, but she raised a hand to stop his reaction. "I'm not here on my father's behalf." Quite the opposite. The deputy closed the door, leaving them alone. Lenore leaned forward, her perfectly manicured fingers splayed on the metal table between them. "I've been watching what's happening. The dog, the collar, the hunt footage. I know what my father's become. Why should I trust you?" Reed asked, though desperation made him willing to listen to anyone who might help. Lenore's composed facade cracked slightly. "Because I left that ranch 10 years ago, when I realized what was happening there. Because I've spent a decade trying to find a way to stop him. And because that dog you found, he wasn't just some random guard dog." She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. This is my father's ledger. Guest fees, dates, names, everything about his hunting parties. But more importantly, I know about Bruno. Reed leaned forward. What about him? He belonged to Marcus Chen, one of my father's security contractors. Marcus figured out what was happening on the ranch, but he knew no one would believe him without proof. So he started training Bruno specifically to be a witness. A witness? Reed's mind raced back to every interaction with the shepherd, seeing them in a new light. The collar wasn't just some novelty item. Marcus programmed it with specific phrases, trained Bruno to activate them at certain triggers. The dog was meant to be found, meant to lead someone to the evidence. Lenore's voice shook slightly. Marcus disappeared 3 months ago. The official story was he quit, but Reed felt sick. They killed him. Almost certainly. But they didn't know about Bruno's training. The dog escaped during a storm, and they've been hunting for him ever since. She slid the ledger across the table. There's more. Your friend Tamsin? They're holding her at the ranch. My father plans to make her part of tomorrow night's hunt, to silence both of you. Horror and rage warred in Reed's chest. I have to get out of here. I have to stop them. That's why I'm here. Lenore pulled out a folded paper with handwritten codes. These are the gate codes for the ranch's security system. The northern fence has a blind spot near the old creek bed. And most importantly, I have proof that the sheriff's been taking bribes to look the other way. She produced a USB drive, bank records, emails, everything needed to force him to release you. I'm taking it to Judge Martinez right now. She's the only one in the county my father hasn't bought. Reed stared at the woman across from him, seeing the pain and determination in her eyes. Why now? Why help us? Lenore's carefully maintained composure cracked. Because I've spent 10 years living with the guilt of walking away. Because that dog was trained to be a voice for the voiceless, and they're going to kill him for it. Because your friend Tamsin doesn't deserve to die for trying to do the right thing. She took a shaky breath. Because someone has to stop my father, and you're the first person who's gotten this close. The dog really was trained as a witness, Reed asked, still processing this revelation. Marcus was brilliant with animals. He spent months teaching Bruno specific behaviors, how to lead people to evidence, how to activate certain phrases on the collar, even how to respond to danger. The dog was his insurance policy, his way of making sure the truth would come out even if he couldn't tell it himself. Reed remembered how Bruno had pulled him away from the hidden ravine, had led them to the cached phone. It hadn't been random. The dog had been doing exactly what he was trained to do. My father's hunters will be at the ranch tomorrow night, Lenore continued, sliding the gate codes across the table. They're wealthy men who pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to hunt human beings for sport. The ledger proves it. Dates, names, amounts. Everything you need to expose them. She stood, smoothing her expensive blazer with trembling hands. I'll get you out of here. But Bruno has to be saved too. He's not just a dog. He's living testimony to my father's crimes. Marcus made sure of that. How much time do we have? They're planning to put Bruno down at 7 a.m. The hunt is scheduled for 10 p.m. tomorrow night. Tamsin. Lenore's voice caught. They're keeping her sedated in the old foreman's cabin. My father thinks making an example of her will discourage any future interference. Reed clutched the ledger and codes like lifelines. Thank you. I know what this must be costing you. Just stop him, Lenore said quietly. Stop him before he destroys any more lives. She paused at the door. And Mr. Halpern? Bruno wasn't just trained to find evidence. He was trained to protect witnesses. That's why he saved you at the ravine. It's what Marcus designed him to do. After she left, Reed sat in the consultation room, mind reeling from these revelations. Bruno wasn't just some abused guard dog who'd stumbled into his life by chance. He was a deliberately created witness, trained to expose crimes that would otherwise go unpunished. And tomorrow morning, they planned to silence him forever. The weight of this knowledge pressed on Reed's chest. He thought of Marcus Chen, who'd spent months carefully training a dog to be his voice after death. Thought of Tamsin, drugged and helpless, waiting to be hunted like an animal. thought of Bruno, alone in his kennel, still faithfully carrying out his missing master's final mission. Time was running out for all of them. But now, thanks to an unexpected ally, Reed had the tools to fight back. He just had to pray Lenore could get him out of this cell in time to use them. The consultation room door opened again. The deputy who'd brought him looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Judge Martinez's office just called. She wants to see you, and the sheriff, now." Reed clutched the ledger tighter, hope flickering to life in his chest. Lenore had kept her word. Now he just had to pray they could move fast enough to save both Bruno and Tamsin before it was too late. The stakes had never been higher. A dog trained to expose atrocity. A woman who might pay the ultimate price for helping him. And somewhere in the pre-dawn darkness, wealthy men prepared for another hunt, confident in their power and impunity. All the pieces were in place for a final confrontation. Reed squared his shoulders as the deputy led him out. Thanks to Lenore Vale's courage, he had the weapons he needed to fight back. Now he just had to make sure he used them in time. The pre-dawn darkness cloaked the county kennel in shadows as Lenore Vale's BMW pulled up silently, headlights off. Reed crouched in the passenger seat, his heart pounding against his ribs. They had less than 15 minutes before Bruno's scheduled euthanasia at 7 o'clock in the morning. "The night guard is in my father's pocket," Lenore whispered, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "But I convinced him to take a coffee break. We have 5 minutes, maybe less." Reed nodded, checking his watch. 6:47 in the morning. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the mountains in shades of violet and gray. He could hear Bruno's deep bark from inside the building, as if the dogs sensed their presence. "Here." Lenore pressed a keycard into his palm. "Backdoor access. I requisitioned it yesterday as a board member." Her sharp features softened for a moment. "Save him, Mr. Halpern. He's more than just a dog. He's our best chance at exposing everything." Reed slipped out of the car, staying low as he crept around the building's perimeter. The keycard worked with a soft click, and he eased inside. The familiar smell of antiseptic and dog food filled his nostrils. Bruno's increasingly urgent barks echoed down the corridor. At the end of the corridor, hall, Reed could see the prep room light was already on. His stomach clenched. They were getting ready for the procedure early. He quickened his pace, reaching Bruno's kennel just as footsteps approached from the other direction. "Easy, boy," Reed whispered, fumbling with the latch. Bruno's tail wagged frantically. But the trained dog stayed silent now, understanding the need for stealth. The kennel door swung open just as voices became audible around the corner. "Let's get this done before Halpern's hearing," someone was saying. "Sheriff wants no loose ends." Reed's hands shook as he clipped a lead to Bruno's collar. The German Shepherd pressed against his leg, a solid warmth in the dim hallway. Together, they backed away from the approaching footsteps. "What the hell?" The voice was closer now. "The kennel's empty." Reed and Bruno broke into a run, paws and boots squeaking on the linoleum. Behind them, shouts of alarm erupted. The back door was just ahead, but a figure appeared, blocking their path. Without hesitation, Bruno launched forward, his powerful shoulder catching the guard in the midsection. The man went down with a whoosh of expelled air, and Reed vaulted over him, the dog right on his heels. They burst out into the gray dawn. Lenore's car engine roared to life as they sprinted across the parking lot. Reed yanked the door open, and Bruno leaped in, nearly knocking Lenore into the driver's side window. "Go," Reed shouted, barely getting his own door closed as Lenore floored the accelerator. The BMW's tires squealed on the asphalt as they peeled out of the lot, leaving behind a chorus of angry yells. "They'll call it in," Lenore said grimly, taking corners at dangerous speeds. "You need to get to the ranch before they can organize a proper search." She reached into the back seat, pulling out a backpack. "There's water, some protein bars, basic first aid. The controlled burn is scheduled to start at 9 o'clock in the morning. They're using it as cover for today's exercise." Reed checked his watch again. 7:05 in the morning. Less than 2 hours to get into position. In the back seat, Bruno stood alert, his ears pricked forward, The dog seemed to understand exactly what was at stake. "Drop us at the North Fire Road," Reed said. "It's the closest access to the foreman's cabin." He reached over to scratch Bruno's ears. "You ready to save another life, boy?" The shepherd's tail wagged once, decisively. Reed smiled grimly. Together, they'd already survived a ravine, exposed a conspiracy, and escaped execution. Now they just had to rescue Tamsin from the heart of Vale's operation, while outmaneuvering both hired killers and a controlled burn. Lenore took them up through the winding mountain roads, the BMW's engine purring as they climbed. The morning sun painted the scattered clouds in shades of orange and gold, but Reed could see darker clouds gathering to the west. The wind was picking up, not ideal conditions for a controlled burn. "They'll start the fire here," Lenore said, pulling onto a narrow dirt track. "Work it south and east, using the wind to drive any targets toward their hunting zones." Her voice was bitter. "My father's been running these games for years. The fire is new, though. He must be getting desperate." She stopped the car at a gate marked, "Private property. No trespassing." Beyond it, Reed could see the fire road snaking up into dense pine forest. Somewhere in those trees, Tamsin was being held, waiting to become prey in a twisted game. "The foreman's cabin is 2 miles up, just past the old creek bed," Lenore said. "They'll have guards, but most of the security will be focused on the main ranch house. That's where the clients gather." She spat the word like it tasted foul. Reed shouldered the backpack and checked Bruno's collar one last time. The shepherd stood perfectly still, allowing the inspection, just as he'd been trained. The talking mechanism was still intact, though. Reed hoped they wouldn't need it. They had better evidence now, thanks to Lenore's ledger. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For everything." Lenore's sharp features softened again. "Just get her out. And Reed?" She met his eyes. "When you see my father, make him pay." Reed nodded grimly. He opened the car door and Bruno jumped out, taking up a perfect heel position. Together, they slipped through the gate and started up the fire road. Behind them, Lenore's BMW disappeared back down the mountain. The wind was definitely strengthening, carrying with it the scent of pine and sage. Reed checked his watch one more time. 7:25 in the morning. Less than 2 hours until the burn started. He looked down at Bruno, remembering what Lenore had said about the dog being trained to protect witnesses. "Okay, boy," he said softly. "Let's go get her." They moved quickly but carefully up the fire road, using the trees for cover whenever possible. The morning light strengthened, burning away the last traces of dawn mist. In the distance, Reed could hear vehicles moving. ATVs probably, getting into position for the day's exercise. Bruno's ears suddenly pricked forward. The dog's nose lifted, testing the wind. A moment later, Reed smelled it too, wood smoke. They were starting the burn early. "Change of plans," he muttered. "We need to move faster." As if in response, a thin column of smoke rose above the trees ahead of them. The wind gusted stronger, and Reed could hear the distant crack of burning wood. They were running out of time, but Bruno seemed more focused than ever, moving with purpose as they climbed higher into the elk range. The dog had been trained for exactly this kind of mission, finding and protecting witnesses. Now, with smoke beginning to thicken the air around them, they had to reach Tamsin before both fire and hunters closed in. Through the thickening smoke, Reed spotted a concrete culvert leading beneath the main lodge. He gestured to Bruno, and they crouched low, making their way toward the opening. Water trickled through the bottom of the pipe, cooling their feet as they crept forward. "Easy now," Reed whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the approaching fire. The culvert was wide enough for them to move single file, though Reed had to stoop to avoid hitting his head. Bruno's nails clicked softly against the concrete as they advanced. After 30 feet of darkness, they reached a metal grate. Reed pulled out the small multi-tool Lenore had included in their pack. His hands trembled as he worked at the rusted bolts, aware that every second counted. Finally, the grate swung free with a quiet groan. They emerged into a dim stone cellar that smelled of earth and motor oil. Reed's heart nearly stopped when he saw her, Tamsin was there, bound to a wooden chair. Her dark hair had fallen across her face, but he could see she was conscious, her chest rising and falling with quick, shallow breaths. A guard lounged nearby, scrolling through his phone. Before Reed could move, the man looked up and jumped to his feet. "Hey, you can't." Bruno launched forward like a furry missile, powerful jaws clamping down on the guard's arm. The man screamed and dropped his phone, which skittered across the floor. He tried to shake the shepherd off, but Bruno held firm, driving him to his knees. Reed raced to Tamsin, pulling out his pocket knife to saw through the zip ties binding her wrists and ankles. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently. "I'm okay," she managed, though her voice was hoarse. "But Reed, they're planning another hunt. Tonight, they brought in 3 more people, told them it was some kind of extreme survival game." "We'll stop them," Reed promised, helping her stand. Her legs were shaky from being bound, and he steadied her with an arm around her waist. "But first we have to get out of here." A familiar voice echoed from the top of the cellar stairs. "I'm afraid that won't be happening." Eldon Vale stepped into view, Sheriff Keats close behind him. The rancher's silver hair caught the dim light as he looked down at them with cold satisfaction. "Did you really think we wouldn't have cameras watching every approach?" Vale asked. Though I must admit, the culvert was creative. He nodded to the sheriff, who reached for a large valve wheel mounted on the wall. Reed's eyes widened as he realized what they intended. "No," the pipes overhead began to groan. Water burst from multiple points, cascading down into the cellar with shocking force. The guard scrambled up the stairs, clutching his bleeding arm. Bruno released him and ran back to Reed and Tamsin. "The evidence dies with you," Vale said calmly. "A tragic accident during an out-of-control fire. Such a shame." He and the sheriff disappeared, slamming and bolting the heavy door at the top of the stairs. The water was already ankle-deep and rising fast. Reed grabbed Tamsin's hand and splashed toward the stairs, but the current was getting stronger. They made it halfway up before a powerful surge knocked them both back down. Reed went under, swallowing water as he tumbled. The world became a confused swirl of bubbles and darkness. His lungs burned. Just when panic started to set in, powerful jaws clamped onto his jacket collar, dragging him upward. He broke the surface with a desperate gasp, Bruno still gripping him firmly. The shepherd's strong legs churned through the water, pulling Reed toward a stack of crates that floated near the wall. Tamsin was already there, clinging to the makeshift raft. "The culvert!" she shouted over the roar of the water. "It's our only chance!" Reed nodded, unable to speak yet. The water was chest-high now, and still rising. Together, they pushed off from the wall, letting the current carry them toward the culvert entrance. Bruno swam beside them, occasionally nudging the crates to keep them on course. The opening looked impossibly small with the water gushing from it. Reed took a deep breath. "When I count to 3, take the biggest breath you can and dive. The current should carry us through." Tamsin's fingers found his and squeezed. Bruno paddled closer, ready to follow them into the darkness. 1, 2, 3. Inside the control room, Lenore Vale's hands flew across the keyboard with determined precision. Screens lined the walls, showing security feeds from across the property. Her father's meticulous record-keeping would be his downfall. The ledger detailed every guest, every payment, every hunt. "This is going live now," she muttered, uploading the documents to multiple news outlets. Her fingers trembled slightly as she activated the emergency broadcast system her father had installed for ranch-wide announcements. Static crackled through the speakers. "My name is Lenore Vale." Her voice echoed across the property. "Everything you're about to hear is true." She patched in the radio chatter from the security teams, their casual discussions of targets and cleanup, now broadcasting for all to hear. Meanwhile, in the cellar, Reed, Tamsin, and Bruno fought against the rising water. The current had become so strong it threatened to sweep them off their feet. Reed spotted a maintenance ladder partially hidden behind some shelving. "There!" he shouted over the roar of water. "We can climb up!" Bruno paddled strongly beside them as they made their way across. The shepherd's presence gave them stability against the current. Reed boosted Tamsin up first, then helped Bruno find purchase on the rungs. The dogs scrambled upward with surprising agility. They emerged onto a terrace just as Lenore's voice filled the air, reading dates and amounts from the ledger. Reed saw his father's face contort with rage as he realized what was happening. The sheriff drew his weapon, but his hands were shaking. "It's over, Dad," Lenore's voice declared. "Everyone knows the truth now." Eldon and the sheriff had them cornered against the terrace railing. Behind them, smoke from the out-of-control fire painted the sky an ominous orange. Water streamed from their clothes as they faced off, the truth of Vale's operation echoing across the property for all to hear. The steady thrum of helicopter blades cut through the chaos. Through the smoke-filled air, a sleek black helicopter descended toward the terrace, hovering just above the railing. Eldon Vale made a desperate dash toward it, shoving Reed aside. "You've ruined everything," Eldon snarled, grabbing Reed's jacket and yanking him toward the spinning rotors. The wind whipped violently around them as Reed struggled to break free, his feet sliding on the wet terrace. Bruno launched forward with lightning speed, his powerful jaws clamping onto Reed's sleeve. The shepherd pulled back with all his might, dragging Reed away from certain death just as the rotors sliced through the air where his head had been moments before. State police helicopters appeared through the smoke, spotlights cutting through the haze. The sheriff dropped his weapon, raising his hands in surrender as armed troopers rappelled onto the terrace. 2 officers tackled Eldon before he could reach his escape vehicle, driving him to the ground as they secured his wrists with handcuffs. The controlled burn that had grown wild was already being contained by firefighting crews. Water from the flooded cellar drained away, leaving behind soaked documents and hard drives, evidence that could not be destroyed. Bruno stood tall beside Reed, his amber eyes alert and proud, tail held high. Once again, the shepherd had proven himself not just a witness, but a hero. In the days that followed, justice moved with unexpected speed. The evidence Lenore had broadcast, combined with the physical proof recovered from the flood, created an ironclad case. Local news vans clustered outside the courthouse as Eldon Vale and Sheriff Keats were let in. Heads bowed, their wrists bound in steel handcuffs. The district attorney's office moved swiftly to reinstate Porter Ames. He stood before the press, his tie finely straight, vindication evident in his tired eyes. "This case proves that truth eventually comes to light," he said, "thanks to people brave enough to stand up for what's right." Reed sat in the witness box, Bruno at his feet by special permission. This time, when he spoke, people listened. The same faces that had dismissed him as a troublemaker now leaned forward, hanging on every word. He described finding Bruno, discovering the caller's message, and uncovering the horrifying truth about the hunts. "The dog was programmed to speak," Reed testified, his voice steady. "But more than that, he was trained to bear witness, to lead someone like me to the truth." Tamsin returned to the veterinary clinic, her head held high. Clients and co-workers alike treated her with new respect, understanding the courage it had taken to stand against Vale's operation. During quiet moments between appointments, she would find Reed and Bruno in the kennel area, the 3 of them sharing a bond strengthened by all they'd survived. For Reed, the feeling of vindication was complex. It wasn't about proving others wrong, it was about staying true to what he knew was right. His reputation was restored, but more importantly, his own faith in himself had deepened. The quiet kennel tech who once doubted his worth now stood tall, knowing his integrity had never wavered. "Sometimes," he told Tamsin as they watched Bruno play in the afternoon sun, "doing the right thing means standing alone, until you're not alone anymore." The adoption papers felt different from the other documents Reed had signed during the investigation. These weren't about exposing crimes or testifying to dark deeds. These made Bruno officially his. The German shepherd's tail wagged as if he understood the significance, his amber eyes bright with contentment. They removed the talking collar for the last time, storing it away as evidence. Bruno didn't need mechanical words anymore. His loyalty and courage spoke volumes. He'd proven himself 100 times over, from that first stormy night to the final confrontation at Vale's Lodge. Standing on the ridge of Elk Range, Reed and Tamsin surveyed the sprawling landscape. The spring breeze carried promise instead of secrets now. They'd drawn up plans to transform this place of darkness into something meaningful, a sanctuary for rescued dogs, specializing in rehabilitation and retraining. "We'll give them a second chance," Tamsin said, her hand finding Reed's. "Just like Bruno gave us." Reed nodded, watching Bruno explore the grass at their feet. The quiet kennel tech who once blended into the background had found his place in the world. He was seen now, really seen, not just by the community that had doubted him, but by the two beings who mattered most: the brave dog at his side and the woman who'd believed in him from the start. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.